what? Are we ready? She says, go. What is real justice? That's what we're talking about today. But before we do that, we're actually going to go backwards from just a tiny amount and finish up something from last week first. So, you will read our Matthew passage. Have y'all figured out what Matthew 28 is yet? The Great Commission. Have y'all figured it out? No. All right, we're going to skip that. Y'all know your one job. Okay.
One job.
One job. That's our job. Do not get distracted from the mission. That's why we're doing this study, because we're talking about all these different cultural issues which tend to distract us and get away from our one job. You focus on your one job, that means you got to equip yourself to deal with these cultural issues so you can do your one job. That's how all that works. Okay. Human self-destruction is what we're hitting. We're reviewing, but we're only reviewing this week that one concept. Human self-destruction, because Meredith found this video and wanted to play it. That's the only reason we're doing this. No, it's got John MacArthur on it. He did listen to it, because kind of like a lot of the folks we use from Michael Heiser, these good scholarly type people, they say a lot in a few words. It's just, they get good at that. And when I was listening to what he's doing, he quickly runs through the structure about how God created a structure to stop human self-destruction, and how we have systematically undermined and ditched all four. And what he basically says, I'll tell you so that you already have in your mind when he says it. Number one is the concept of God. Knowing that there is a God outside of yourself makes you, knowing that there is a God who will judge you is one thing that controls culture. Well, we ditched God a long time ago in our culture. So it's God, help me remember now, it's God, and then it's the knowledge, your own conscience. So it's God himself in judgment. And then it's him writing his law in your heart. So you have the own conscience that then restrains evil in our culture, which of course, the way you attack that is you change morality and you confuse the whole idea of culture, which is what we're doing. Then you have the family. That's what the family is there for. Then the family, a husband and a wife teaching their children, disciplining their children, teach them how to operate in culture righteously and correctly. That's what the family was. Well, we've been destroying the family for the last 60 years. So you've got God, your own conscience, the family, and guess what the fourth level is? Then it becomes the police. That's what you do. When those three break down, it's the police. Well, what's the final attack? Well, it's black. That's what we're doing, a little bit of what we're talking about this week. Black Lives Matter. Defund the police. The police are racist. Because now if you can attack the police, if you can't deal with the top three, then you have to force morality, force legal. I don't want to use the morality there. You have to force law and obeyance of law. So that's why our founding fathers said that this culture, if we're going to have a democratic republic, not a democracy, if we're going to have a republic, then it's a whole. I think was it actually I think it was Thomas Paine who said this, who by the way was actually not a Christian. It may have not been Thomas Paine, maybe Henry said. Yeah, scratch that. I'm not sure which one of them said this, but that's why he said that our form of government was only acceptable for a righteous Christian nation, because without those three forces, it would break down into tyranny. No, it wasn't one of those. Anyway, I said all of that for a 4-minute video, but anyway, listen to this. He says it so succinctly.
By the way, we are on Fox Detox, so we don't watch this every night. This just popped up on the feed or whatever, Apple TV. So, but it says what is causing teens to become so violent? So that made us watch.
We all know about America's rising crime rate, especially violent crime in urban areas. But did you know that an increasing number of these depraved acts are being committed by young teens? Fox's Matt Finn is in Los Angeles to tell us more. Matt.
Hi, Laura. Over the past few days, extremely disturbing crimes committed by teens in Chicago. 3 boys, 14 and under, were charged with felony charges of aggravated carjacking of a 50-year-old man. In Ohio, 2 13-year-old boys arrested on rape charges. Here in California, a horrifying robbery video in San Francisco Monday. A Chinatown camera store, 3 teens use a hammer trying to smash the glass cases, but they're plexiglass and do not crack. A co-owner grabs a bat and starts swinging. Neighboring workers rushed in to help. The co-owner said he got pepper sprayed, hit in the head with a hammer, needing 10 stitches. And in New Orleans, a 73-year-old grandmother was killed after her arm was ripped off during a carjacking. Video appears to show the woman innocently in her own car when a group of teens rushed in and carjacked her. Neighbors and witnesses were screaming and tried to intervene. Linda Fricke's arm got caught in the seatbelt and was severed as the 4 teens drove her car away, dragging her for 1 block. The stolen car was recovered about 13 blocks away.
And I can't say this enough, when they pulled away and she was in that strap, they made the decision to murder her. They should pay for it.
New Orleans police arrested 4 minors for that deadly carjacking. The police superintendent wants them charged as adults. Laura.
Matt, that is so upsetting on so many levels. Thank you.
It is.
Joining me now is John MacArthur, Grace Community Church pastor. Pastor MacArthur, it's good to see you tonight. I immediately thought of you because I wanted to ask you what you thought was at the heart of this. These inner city youths, this is happening across America. How did things get this bad?
Well, I think you know, Laura, that humanity is capable of some horrendous crimes, whether it's killing a senior citizen or bombing a hospital full of children in the Ukraine. And God has built into society some restraints. The first restraint is the knowledge of God, that there is a righteous and holy judge to whom we are accountable. That is a restraint on evil. Beyond that, there is the law of God written in the heart. Every culture knows what is right and wrong, because universally that's part of being created in God's image. There's the conscience. We have a society basically that has removed God, so that transcendental restraint is gone. That has flipped morality on its head, so conscience is misinformed. The next restraint is the family. Destroy the family, and there's no opportunity for disciplined raising of children to make them socially capable of interacting in a positive way. The family falls apart, and the next barrier is the police, and by then it's beyond them. Witness the riots last summer when the police just stand there and watch. So it's a sequence of things where this society, the young in this society, have smashed every divine restraint down, and it overwhelms the final governmental institution, which is the police. And then you can throw in how much lawlessness there is at every level, whether it's even politicians or whether it's the immorality of heroes, athletes, movie actors. The culture is so immoral, so against the family, so against God, and you sow that and you reap exactly what we get today.
Well, Pastor MacArthur, I think
Yeah, you see that? So in 2 minutes, I was like, wow. In 2 minutes, he told you in 2 simple minutes why our culture's falling apart. I was just heard of it. Don't you think?
Yeah, she couldn't even feed off of it. She didn't know what to say.
Yeah, she just went, that's it. You're right, that's it. Those restraints, and this is when you know it has to be a demonic, satanic, the unseen realms motive, because it's such a deliberate attack on God's structure that has been going on for about 75 years. It's been going on ever since the garden, but in our culture, it's been going on for about 75 years. And
The study?
it's been going on for 75 years. And so in other words, it's going on far past individual lifetime. Who did we hit last week? What's his name? Klaus Schwab. This has been going on well past individual lifetime. It is an agenda that is being funneled and promulgated for decades and decades and decades, all directed to undermine and destroy God's intended structure. So that tells you there's got to be a supernatural level there. It's beyond individual lifestyles. Individual lifespans by far. All right.
Also, you might have seen this on Facebook. Stacy Davidson actually sent it to us, and we were going to play it, and then we said, no, we're just going to give it as your homework assignment.
That's right. Homework assignment is, did y'all, everybody get this or see it on Facebook? See it on the feed?
It's like a 10-minute clip from his podcast that talks about the Great Reset, because we've been talking about that so much. It's really good.
Yeah, they do a little, he does Q&As. So basically he's responding, it's about a 10-minute response to a question. And it's like, wow, it's just the great ultimate reset. And he actually uses that term, and this was like from 2018, I think it was a while back. So anyway, so if you get a chance, listen to it. And ultimately what it points to is the only reset we're really waiting on is the end of days when Christ returns, and he kind of walks you through that. It's really cool. All right.
So now, just as the idea that God writes right and wrong on your heart and your conscience, if you have children, you will have heard this before.
So now we're switching into Roman numeral 3. So now we're starting this week. That was review. This is what is the social justice movement. We found this video. This is a perfect video. This quickly tells you exactly what the social justice movement is. Here it is. It's quick, it's easy, it's straightforward.
That's not fair. Fair? Fair? The fair. Fair? The fair. That's not fair. That's not fair. There was a line for cookies. I was the first one in line and he gave it to everybody else except for me. That's not fair.
Being fair would, like, if you went somewhere and you invited someone and then you change your mind and not letting them come with you, that's not being fair. And being fair, if we invited them, they could come with us.
Every time when we had snacks, she lets us have like more and more and more cookies. The first half has cookies and the other half has no cookies. That's not fair. That's not fair, but it's fun. We went up to clean our house once, and my sister got $5 and I only got $2. That's not fair. They got to go out to eat and I didn't. That's not fair.
I got in trouble because my friend tripped me over and then accidentally tripped him over by walking in front of him, and then he got tripped over and then he told on me and I got a referral.
That's not fair. Sometimes he won't share his toys with me. I just walk away. That's not fair.
I got in trouble lots of times. That would be unfair. I already got like more than 3 referrals over the years. Unfair? I think this is like my 4th referral this year. That would be unfair.
Not fair, fair, fair. When your brothers or sister do something bad and the parents aren't there to see it, you can get the blame for it. I don't really think that's fair. I just think in my mind that like, oh, that's not fair, not fair. That's not fair, not fair. That's not fair, not fair. I want to be fair. That's not fair. Fair, not fair. That's not fair. I don't like it when you be unfair. It makes me frustrating. Oh.
There it is. That is.
Is your natural deodorant?
No.
There it is. The social justice movement is all about that's not fair. When we watched that, we thought, well, there it is. That's not fair. That's the bottom line of the social justice movement. Oh, wasn't that funny? We're the teachers in the room, the young children. You see that?
How many times have we heard that?
Oh, our middle son, Reed, he was the fair one.
Yeah.
I mean, everything, his
yeah.
brain worked that way. It better be. I told y'all the story. He was on the soccer field, and the parents, it was a little bitty 4 years old, when the parents would coach, you know, they'd walk out there and kind of be the referees and coach, and they were letting the kids kick the ball out of bounds. And you know, when it's out of bounds, that ball goes back to you. He finally dives on the ball at 4 years old, rolls over and screams, "That was out! That was not fair. You don't give that ball back to that kid and kick it out." So anyway, fairness, they're all about fairness.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so, all right, and now I have a question. Wait, where's my do not know? Okay, in a nutshell, that is the social justice movement. But, now here's the highlighted part, but it's actually not funny at all. It is dangerous and destructive. That's where we're headed. All right, now I've got a question for y'all. This is a real question. Y'all answer it. Do all paths lead to God? We've been talking about this for weeks. Do they not?
No.
No. No, so all paths don't lead to God. Wrong. All paths lead to God. I just threw this in the notes because I was like, y'all know I love doing that. Y'all are all wrong.
He's a teacher.
That's not fair.
That's not fair.
That was actually, you're wrong. All paths do lead to God. Every one of them. When you die, you will stand in front of a holy judge. The question is whether you're part of his kingdom or he's going to judge you. All paths lead to God. I love that. I heard that this week. Don't you love that?
Define your definition of path.
Exactly. No, I'm glad you say that, because that's what the whole social justice movement's all about. Just like when we talked about love several weeks ago, it's all about redefining. You have to define your terms. But you're right, all paths do lead to God. It just depends on what he's going to do with you when you get there. I love that.
But then after that brief appointment, you have an eternity in separation there from
Exactly. Then no path leads to God.
That's
All
really,
paths don't lead to heaven.
That's right. That's it. All paths.
They lead to a brief appointment. I like
They
that.
lead to a brief appointment.
and overall leads to direction.
That is so true. Very true. I just like that. I heard that on Stand Up for the Truth this week, and I wrote it down because I like that quote.
That
I'm
is
throwing the
good.
notes somewhere. All right. Wikipedia defines social justice. I hope I took some of this out. Yes. This is the Wikipedia definition. Social justice is justice in terms of the distribution of wealth. That's the primary fundamental mechanism that underlies the other.
Like socialism?
Oh yeah, that's what it is, socialism, yeah. Social justice is justice in terms of the distribution of wealth, opportunity, and privileges within the society. In the current movement for social justice, the emphasis has been on the breaking of barriers for social mobility. The creation, I don't want to stop, the creation of safety nets and economic justice. You hear that term a lot, economic justice, which is part of that distribution of wealth. Social justice assigns rights and duties in the institutions of society which enable people to receive the basic benefits and burdens of cooperation. So that's the Wikipedia definition. Now what's interesting, and I didn't want to go through this, it would have taken too long, but if you just Google social justice, look at Wikipedia or any others, it'll generally give you this history of social justice. That's not so funny. We always think things are new. Nothing is ever new, as Solomon told us in Ecclesiastes. Nothing is ever new. Social justice is a terminology that's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. Philosophers back in the Greek time were using the concept of social justice, and it flows. And you know what's interesting, what I really found interesting, I just said I wasn't going to get off on this, and I'm not. I'll give you a little. What was interesting is it centered in heavily on the church, and specifically the Evangelical Church used it real heavily in the 18th and 19th century. And that's why today what you see is social justice redefined but using Christian terms, because it came out of a lot of the evangelical, and that was the concept that we need to take care of the poor. You know, Jesus, so it was a legitimate concept in the 18th and 19th century that the church really grabbed a hold to. But it's been, anyway, what I found funny about Wikipedia is the definition has morphed tremendously over the years. Every generation grabs the phrase and then just redefines it. Every generation does. Because the bottom line is a socialist agenda. And so you just redefine it each year, each generation. But anyway, I found that funny. That is nothing new at all. Equality of outcome, which is socialism, not equality of opportunity. Our country was built on, or our fundamental beliefs were built on the equality of opportunity. And most of our jurisprudence prior to the lately was generally based on, that's what we're looking for here, is that we're going to dismantle, institutional racism is institutional, should have been institutional, I don't mean to get off on all this, should have been institutional racism that denied opportunity. You don't allow an African American to go to a college, that's an institutional racism. Those have been dismantled for the fact, anyway, I don't want to get off in all that. But my point is, I forgot what my point was. It's equality of opportunity was generally what we've talked about in our culture. But what's happening now, what they mean is equality of outcome, meaning two people in two different, far different situations should make the same amount of money, have the same health care, have the same this, that, whatever, same house, same car, same whatever. If the outcome is equalized versus your opportunity to achieve that being equalized. Yes, sir.
And have y'all noticed the sleight of hand they've had even in the last year, going from equality to equity?
Yeah.
Just kind of that's
Terminology.
and that's exactly what we're talking about. Equity is the equality of outcome, not equality of opportunity, which by definition is, equity is by definition not equality.
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
And they made that switch like in a week's time. They all started talking equity instead of equality, and like most people didn't notice.
Our current culture's made that switch. All you gotta do is grab Karl Marx's books, and he talked about it then. He grabbed it from the French philosopher. I mean, you know, that just goes right on back. You just trace the line. There's nothing new about it whatsoever. It's just it's the newest manifestation of it. But
this article here.
let's look at the very stuff I already said there. Mary says get back on the article. Okay.
What
Here's
is the
article.
social justice movement? The social justice movement has become kind of a thing over the last several years as a moral expression of creating fairness and justice in society. Social justice, however, is not built upon total impartiality or equal justice under the law. Rather, those who promote this approach to defining morality have their own specific criteria for determining what is just and unjust. In modern society, it typically relates to wealth distribution, personal activity, and social privileges. The concept of social justice hasn't always had the meaning we see promoted in modern society. In previous time periods, it was simply a way of referring to an emphasis on taking care of the physical needs of those who were down and out.
That's how the church used it.
This notion has been prominent throughout the history of the Christian church, as Christians have felt a particular calling to the poor, the widowed, those in prison, and the like. I'm skipping certain parts.
Yeah, the little boxes are just things we're skipping this time to make it easier for y'all to follow.
Whereas the sense of the concept of social justice would seem to be a natural fit for the expression of the Christian faith, in our day the term has been co-opted primarily by those who hold a naturalistic worldview. With that, it has lost its genuinely biblical emphasis. What has happened is that the meaning of the term has been changed to reflect a socialist or communist ideology. This can sometimes be quite confusing because most of the people who promote this kind of ideology generally claim to be Christians. However, the Christians who advocate for social justice in this way are primarily members of groups that use an approach to interpreting the Bible that does not reflect traditional biblical theology, the liberal church.
All right, let me just pause for 1 second there to say, you guys, probably everybody in the room for the most part, you've grown up in an evangelical, mostly conservative evangelical environment, and we're flowing through that for the last 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years in this room. But your mainline denominations have long since adopted this and are basically dead. Dead from a growth standpoint, dead from what I would consider a biblical theological standpoint. They have long since adopted it. Your Catholic Church has long since adopted. The scary part right now, which eventually we're going to get into, that's why I was kind of handing out that enemies of the church video. Enemies within the church. The last bastion of American Christianity. Gosh, I hate to almost even say it like that, as if we're so narcissistic. You know, Americans are so known for navel gazing. We just look at our navel the whole time, don't know what's happening in the world. But anyway, navel gazing, I like that. Gosh, I just lost my point.
Where is it creeping into the
Last time.
That's right.
Sorry,
Yeah,
that's
so
exactly.
what's happening now is
Our own church.
heavily now moving into it. We are the last bastion that the evangelical Pentecostal wing of evangelism, of Christianity was we were like the last bastion that kind of keeps pushing back on that. Well, it's coming strong. You'll hear me constantly referring to our young Baptist and evangelical pastors. They are digging all in this and showing up all over the place. But anyway,
We'll get to that. The confusion many people have in understanding why the modern social justice movement is not a biblical approach arises primarily because those who promote it generally use Christian vocabulary to express their views on social justice, but redefine the words using naturalistic worldview concepts. Rather than basing their moral foundation on the absolute foundation of biblical theology, they base it on relativism of naturalism.
which is why you should be teaching our youth biblical theology, not just morality.
Do what feels good, makes you feel good, always tolerate others.
Because in our culture, morality can easily be changed. All you gotta do is watch your Twitter feed, your morality will change. That's why you gotta quit just teaching morality. You better teach theology. Y'all know I get frustrated with that.
Whereas biblical theism looks at rights and duties from the perspective of the individual, social justice thinking considers rights and duties to be derived from the collective, the institutions of society. One of the biggest problems, though, as it relates to promoting social justice relates to moral relativism. Social justice advocates are not really advocates of equal justice, as true equal justice cannot exist in their philosophy. Rather, they pick and choose the ones they consider to be on the receiving end of unjust treatment based on their own arbitrary preferences. According to the word social, the word justice clearly demonstrates that the objective of these advocates is not justice for all, but to provide certain social advantages to those they deem to have received injustice. As such, people in society are not looked at as individuals, but as a collection of various groups that are either advantaged or disadvantaged. By the way, there's your dialectic, advantaged or disadvantaged.
It's all, there's that, they operate on the dialectic. You create two groups, an oppressor and an oppressed, and you pit them against each other looking for a predetermined outcome. What we've been talking about the last 2 weeks, that's what these groups use. That the dialectic is the process they use.
The advantaged groups must be taken down a notch by taking their privilege from them, money, power, prestige, while the disadvantaged must be helped by using the privilege taken from the advantage and giving it to the disadvantaged. And we've all heard of the term white privilege. As for the promotion of this movement within certain Christian denominations, the root of that is primarily found in the various strains of liberal theology. While liberal theology tries to use the Bible to proof text its beliefs, the theology itself is not based on the teachings of the Bible at all. Rather, the worldview foundation of these beliefs is right out of naturalism. One of the most recent incarnations of liberal theology is liberation theology. Liberation theology is a movement that believes that the teachings of Jesus Christ do not promote eternal truths. Rather, they advocate for the elimination of unjust economic, political, and social conditions.
I'll throw this little tidbit in. You guys are just old. I mean, y'all all know Barack Obama, but if you remember, you may have been too young when it was really going on. But you remember when he was running for president, they kept pointing to Jeremiah Wright, his pastor. Well, that was why they kept pointing to him, is he's a massive liberation theology, which is basically a Marxist theology that came out of South America. And to make it work in South and Central America, but to make it work in America, they switched it to racial. So that's what they keep doing. They just change these philosophies. Here in America, the way you create your dialect is race. In communist Russia, they created their dialect, or Stalinist Russia, they created their dialectic by classes. Because they're all white over there, so they didn't use race. When they tried to bring communism to the United States, it fell flat. Guess why? Because we have massive mobility. You had black folks who were succeeding. You had white. You had a culture that was great, and a huge middle class. We don't see ourselves in these different strata. So guess what you do? They finally figured it out. Oh, in America, your dialectic is race. And so you can prove your socialistic using that dialect. You can't use class here because we have people that travel up and down the economic system all the time. We have a wonderful economic system.
So liberation theology teaches that the essence of salvation, this is where it's tricky because this is incorporated into our church and even our definition of salvation. It teaches that the essence of salvation, the purpose of the Christian faith, is to help the poor in their suffering by helping them to overcome the oppression of a society that keeps them down. Essentially, it is Marxist communism dressed up in biblical vocabulary using redefined biblical words. The disadvantaged group is specifically defined, and the oppressors of these individuals are considered to be responsible for giving up their advantage by transferring it to the oppressed. Obviously, the social justice movement is not based on biblical beliefs. Biblical beliefs define salvation as the forgiveness of sin provided by the sacrificial death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It is an eternal focus as opposed to the temporal focus of social justice thinking.
That's your big deal there. We'll hit this a little bit later, but that's the big deal. Is this the shift between temporal focus, meaning the worldly focus, something that ends your lifetime, temporal focus versus eternal. So they try to link it to Christianity. Your Bible is I shouldn't say not concerned, that's not true, but your Bible is ultimately concerned about your eternal destiny. It is an eternal focus. It is not a temporal focus. Matter of fact, I give you verse after verse where Jesus says, you'll always have the poor, and go on. I can give 1,000 different verses where it says that's not the point. But anyway.
There is no doubt that Christians should help the down and out and advocate for justice and equality.
Why? Because we're his imagers, or we're to be salt and light. So that is true.
Those are the decidedly Christian values, and the truth is Christians as a community have done a better job of promoting than that of any other group in the history of the world.
Where your hospitals from, where your educational institutions, where your charities, they all are from the Christian. So Christians have definitely done that. We just haven't tried Marxism with it.
That said, the concepts of justice and equality cannot be allowed to be co-opted and the meanings of these words changed into something else. Social justice, based on the modern usage of the term, does not promote justice at all. It promotes injustice. It promotes advantage towards a preferred group to the disadvantage of another. Christians should, in fact, be very concerned that true justice prevail in society. When we see injustice, we point it out and make whatever changes need to be made to eliminate it. It is, of course, very possible that when a particular injustice appears, it affects an identifiable group of people. But providing justice does not come from transferring advantage from one group to another. It comes from when the system itself is changed in a way to provide true justice to every individual, no matter what group they belong to. Based on a biblical worldview, the bottom line is the individual. That is the only point of view that can ever provide true justice.
So the difference, so that was a good article. There's a lot of reading. Y'all take it with you, digest that article later. But the takeaway from it, if I'm comparing what God's justice is versus this idea of social justice, economic justice, all the liberal theology, all the different ways they use that term. The difference is one is focused on the individual, one is focused on the temporal, and one is focused on the eternal. One is focused on the group, and the other is focused on the individual. You can't be saved by your mommy and daddy's salvation. You can't be saved by the church you go to, blah, 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 because the gospel is an individual thing. It's not a group thing. Now, once you are saved, you join a group. It's called the church. You join his imagers. You join his kingdom. You join his family. But salvation is an individual thing. It's not a group thing. So that's your two different. I'm going to say that one more time. If you've taken these two groups, and they both sound sort of Christian, and you even have evangelical preachers making it sound like they're Christian, but they're not. One is focused on a group, the other is focused on an individual, one is focused on, I'm missing today, but anyway, y'all got that. All right, we're gonna skip this one.
Okay.
We'll skip that. We're gonna play this next week. That was just y'all already seen Bishop Jackson, and we're gonna do just a couple, 2 minutes on it, but we're gonna have that in next week. I'm already babbling too much. I wanna get to Job.
Yes.
Okay, so what is the foundation now? We've given you some funny stuff, sort of the what's unfair, then we've given you some, hey, this is what social justice is, and now we've given you a written kind of look at some comparison between Christianity. Now let's don't do what they do. Right now we haven't defined justice. So even in your minds, if we all said everybody has to write down a definition of justice, they would look very different, because until you define it, people just bring in all kind of stuff. So let's try to spend a little time and focus on what is actual biblical justice. Okay, what is the lesson of the book of Job? Somebody tell me. Y'all just off the top of your head, y'all know what's Job about?
Can you skip it?
I know y'all just can't say it because I'm gonna say it wrong. No, go ahead. No, go ahead. What is it? What is Job about? See, I got her scared to say it. No,
It's about it's a wisdom literature.
it is wisdom literature.
And it's a different view on wisdom literature, because when you put it with the other three, it gives you a complete one. One is like a teacher's view, she knows everything. One is like Ecclesiastes, who's like a midlife.
Wait, you gotta stop because I know you've seen what we're about to show. But anyway, go ahead.
Midlife crisis, like life's not fair, don't go by it. And then Job's the one that's like 60 years old. It's like, I trust God, I know something's going on, but I don't see it. Help me out. And you're angry, and you're questioning, but you're still like, overall, God's got this. So it's kind of that you've been through enough to know that he's got it. Wisdom literature that shows you that.
She's good. She's good. That's
So
really
the
right. But what if you, in one sentence, if you just said, what's the lesson you can learn from Job?
I can't speak in one sentence.
Bad things do happen to good people.
Bad things happen to good people. I was looking for that one. That's a good one. Bad things happen to good people. What else?
God allows Job to be tested by the devil.
He does. I like that. All right.
Life is fair.
Life isn't fair.
It's being taught not to question God.
Yeah. Oh, see that's getting there. All right.
Ultimately,
No,
God's in control.
I wrote down here,
But also,
why
it
do
also
bad
changed
things
your
happen to
idea of
good
justice.
people? Here's the
Because
funny
if you
thing.
never did anything wrong.
If you had asked me before I watched this video, I would have said, yes, probably why do bad things happen to good people? And the funny thing, I didn't really realize this, but Job never answers that question. The book actually never answers that question. It's about that, but it never answers it. Why does God allow suffering? You know, most people say, well, that's got to be in it. It actually never answers that question either. So even though those are subjects in the book, God actually never answers why do good things happen to bad people, and it never answers why does God allow suffering. So the two things we think is the book, it doesn't answer either one of them. So what does it answer? What it answers is, what is God's justice? It's all about justice. And I was like, well, that's pretty cool. So, okay, how many of you, well, you do this because you know how to get to it. How about tell folks?
Bible Project?
This is, see, that's why we knew you watched it.
I know exactly what you're about to say. It's good. Go ahead.
Okay, so I
You guys use the Bible Project?
You can get to it
I've
from
seen
an
it.
app.
Oh.
This is the app, that's newer, but I have the Read Scripture app that they do.
Get this app on your phone.
They're like
These guys
partnered
are
with
awesome. These are folks, by the way, I love all these connections. Heiser has had them on his podcast very much because he found the Bible Project years ago and loved it. And they have a very similar theological approach to the Bible. So it's so funny how Heiser works into this too, even though he's not a part of the Bible Project.
So anyway, each this is read through the Bible, but you can see Joel is, he says he's an auditory learner, and I'm visual, like in med school, the Krebs cycle, you know, I had to draw it all.
Whereas I love podcasts, I can just listen.
Anyway, so this is very good for me to visually see the whole Bible. So anyway, he goes into Job, and I was listening to this, and I'm like, this is justice. This is so cool.
Well, tell them what you're about to say. He'll do an intro to every book, and it's just a cool 5, 6, 7 minute intro.
He gives you the whole overview of the book, the theme of the book, what's being taught, and then you go read the chapters. So here is his overview introduction to the book of Job.
Book of Job. It's a profound and very unique book in the Bible for lots of reasons. The story is set in a very obscure land that's far away from Israel, Uz. The main character, Job, he's not even an Israelite. And the author, who's anonymous, doesn't even set the story in any clear period of ancient history. This all seems intentional, though. It's like the author doesn't want us to be distracted by historical questions, but rather to focus simply on the story of Job and on the questions raised by his experience of suffering. The book of Job has very clear literary design. It opens and closes with a short narrative prologue and then an epilogue. And then the central body of the book is dense Hebrew poetry, representing conversations between Job and 4 dialogue partners called friends. These conversations are then concluded by a series of poetic speeches given by God to Job. Let's dive in and we'll just see how it works together. The prologue introduces us to Job, and we're told that he's a blameless, upright man who honors God. He's a super good guy. And then all of a sudden, we're transported into the heavenly realms, and God is holding court with his staff team. It's a very common image in the Old Testament, describing how God runs the world. And among the heavenly beings is a figure called the Satan, which in Hebrew...
By the way, she calls that because what did they just say? I love all these drawings. It's such a cool way, just a quick overview of it. So what does he draw there? First of all, I like the G on the throne. God, he's got bling on his throne. Don't notice that? Anyway, so what did Heiser call this?
Heavenly Counsel.
Yeah, it's the Divine Counsel. It's all through your Bible. But Job, he doesn't usually use Job. He uses Psalm 83 and various other passages. But Job starts with a Divine Counsel scene, which, by the way, is what Revelation chapter 4 is, that you're called up to. You're called up to a Divine Counsel scene, which is Isaiah, where I saw in his temple, his robe filled the temple. He's at a Divine Counsel scene where the thrones are set up. Your Bible is full of these Divine Counsel scenes. So anyway, the other thing too is
accuser. It's like we're watching a court.
I didn't put this in the notes. I'm going to throw this out here and not explain it at all, because this blew me away. Who is this person right here?
Satan.
Where do we know Satan from before?
Eden.
Huh?
The garden.
Eden. All right, here's the concept. I'm just going to throw this out here. I'm just going to agitate you because I'm not going to say anything about it. But
He does it right. That's the time.
yeah, he does. He's about to do it. What this is, y'all have heard this before. Y'all know what Satan means, right? Satan is not a definite name. It's not a proper name. Satan is not a name. It's a title. It means the accuser. A lot of Bible scholars, I wouldn't necessarily say a majority, but a significant number of Bible scholars believe that this Satan is not the Satan of Eden. This is not the one who we tend to think it is, or we tend to talk about, oh, now Satan, we're talking about the guy from the garden, is now in Job doing all this. A lot of Bible scholars looking at the Greek and the Hebrew would argue that they're two different things. This is an accuser. This is, and there are lots of them. These are those who look at the earth and bring and tell God what's going on and bring accusation as to what's happening down there. Anyway, it's just a concept. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but you'll see that the concept is this is probably, or may not, I wouldn't say probably, may not be the Satan of Eden. Just throw that in the back of your mind. We'll hit that one day.
God presents Job as a truly righteous man. And then the accuser challenges God's policy of rewarding righteous people like Job. He says, the only reason Job obeys you is because you bless him with prosperity. Let Job suffer. Then we'll see how righteous he actually is. And then God agrees to let the accuser inflict suffering on Job. Now, it's at this point in the story that most of us go, what? Why did God do that? And then we assume that this book is going to answer that question, why God allows good people to suffer. But as you read on, the book doesn't answer that question. Nothing in the book ever answers that question. The prologue is setting up the real questions this book is trying to get at. questions about God's justice, and whether God operates the universe according to the strict principle of justice. And the response to those questions comes as you read through to the end of the book, not at the beginning. The ultimate reason for Job's suffering is simply never revealed. So the prologue concludes with a suffering and bewildered Job, who's rebuked by his wife, and he's approached by three friends who are going to try and provide wisdom and counsel. Their names are Eliphaz, the Temanite, Bildad, the Shuhite, and Zophar, the Naamathite. They're all non-Israelites like Job, and they represent the best of ancient Near Eastern thinking about God and suffering and human condition, and this moves us into the main part of the book. First, Job speaks. This is how this section of the book works. First, Job is going to speak, and then they'll follow a response from a friend. Then Job will respond to that friend. Then another friend will respond to Job's response, and so on back and forth for 3 cycles. And this whole debate is focused on 3 questions. Is God truly just in character? And does God run the universe on the strict principle of justice? And if so, then how is Job's suffering to be explained? As we're going to see, Job and the friends, they're working from a huge assumption about what God's justice ought to look like in the world. Namely, that every single thing that happens in the universe should operate according to the strict principle of justice. So if you're a wise, good person and you honor God, good things will happen to you. God will reward you. But if you're evil and stupid and do sinful things, bad things will happen to you. God will punish you. Now, Job's constant argument throughout his speeches is this. First of all, that he's innocent, and so the implication of that is that his suffering is not a divine punishment. Now we know from the prologue, both of these things are true. Remember, God himself said, Job is righteous and blameless. And so Job concludes his argument by accusing God. God either doesn't run the world according to justice, or even worse, God himself is simply unjust. The friends, on the other hand, they beg to differ. Their argument is that God is just. The implication being that God always runs the world according to justice in this way. And so they conclude by accusing not God, but Job. Job must have done something really, really bad for God to punish him like this. They even start making up possible sins that Job must have committed. Job protests to all of this. In fact, he gets so fed up with the friends that he eventually just gives up on them. He takes up his case directly with God. Now, something to be aware of is that Job, he's on an emotional roller coaster in these poems. He used to think that God is just, but now he can't reconcile that with his suffering. And so in some outbursts, Job, he'll accuse God of being a bully. Once he even declares that God has orchestrated all the injustice in the world. But the moment he utters that thought, he's terrified of it because he wants to hope and believe that God is truly just. Job is all over the place in this section. And so he makes one last statement of his innocence, and then he demands that God show up personally to explain himself. Now it's at this point that a surprise friend shows up, Elihu the Buzite. Now, he's not an Israelite, but he does have a Hebrew name. And Elihu, he has the same assumption as Job and the friends. He argues that God is just, and that implies that God always operates the universe according to justice. But then Elihu draws a more sophisticated conclusion about why good people suffer. It may not be punishment for sin in the past. God might inflict suffering as a warning to help people avoid sin in the future. Or God might use pain and suffering to build character or to teach people valuable lessons. Elihu doesn't claim to know why Job is suffering, but one thing he is certain of. Job is wrong to accuse God of being unjust. Job doesn't even respond to Elihu, and the dialogues come to a close. It's like the wisdom of the ancients has been spent and the mystery remains. And then, all of a sudden, God shows up in a whirlwind, and he responds to Job personally. He first responds to Job's accusation that he's unjust and incompetent at running the universe. So God takes Job on a virtual tour of the universe, and he starts asking him all these questions about the order and origins of the cosmos. Was Job ever around when God architected the earth or organized the constellations? Has Job ever commanded the sunrise or controlled the weather? God has his eyes on all of these cosmic details that Job has never even conceived of. Then God starts going into detail describing the grazing habits of mountain goats and how deer give birth, or the feeding patterns of lions and wild donkeys. What's the point of all this? Remember the assumption of Job and his friends about what it looks like for God to run the world according to justice. Underneath that assumption is a deeper one. that Job and his friends have a wide enough perspective on life to make such a claim about how God ought to run the world. And God's response with this virtual tour, it deconstructs all of these assumptions. It first of all shows that the universe is a vast, complex place, and that God has his eyes on all of it, every detail. Job, on the other hand, has only the small horizon of his life experience to draw from. His view of the world is very limited. And so what looks like divine injustice, from Job's point of view, needs to be seen in an infinitely larger context. Job is simply not in a position to make such a huge accusation about God. After the virtual tour, God asks Job if he would like to micromanage the world for a day, according to the strict principle of justice that Job and his friends assume, punishing every evil deed of every person at every moment with precise retribution.
We would all be
The
dead.
fact is that carrying out justice in a world like ours is extremely complex. It's never black and white, like Job and his friends seem to think. Which leads to God's last point. He starts describing these two fantastic creatures, Behemoth and Leviathan, which some people think are poetic depictions of a hippo and a crocodile, but more likely they refer to well-known creatures from ancient Near Eastern mythology that are used elsewhere in the Bible as symbols of the disorder and danger that exist in God's good world. These creatures, they're not evil. God's actually quite proud of them, but they're not safe either. The point is that God's world is amazing and very good, but it's not perfect or always safe. God's world has order and beauty, but it's also wild and sometimes dangerous, just like these two fantastic creatures. And so we come back to the big question of Job's suffering. Why is there suffering in God's world? Whether it's from earthquakes or wild animals or from other humans, God doesn't explain why. What he says is that we live in an extremely complex, amazing world that at this stage, at least, is not designed to prevent suffering. And that's God's response. Job challenged God's justice. God responds that Job doesn't have sufficient knowledge about our universe to make such a claim. Job demanded a full explanation from God. And what God asked Job for is trust in his wisdom and character. And so, Job responds with humility and repentance. He apologizes for accusing God, and he acknowledges that he's overstepped his bounds. Then all of a sudden, the book concludes with a short epilogue. First, God says that the friends were wrong, that their ideas about God's justice were just too simple, not true to the complexity of the world or God's wisdom. And then God says that Job has spoken rightly about him. Now this is surprising, because it can't apply to everything Job said. I mean, we know Job drew hasty and wrong conclusions, but God still approves of Job's wrestling. How Job came honestly before God with all of his emotion and pain and simply wanted to talk to God himself. And God says that's the right way to process through all of this, through the struggle of prayer. The book concludes with Job having his health, his family, his wealth all restored. Not as a reward for good behavior, but simply as a generous gift from God. And that's the end of the book. So the book of Job, it doesn't unlock the puzzle of why bad things happen to good people. Rather, it does invite us to trust God's wisdom when we do encounter suffering, rather than try and figure out the reasons for it. When we search for reasons, we tend to either simplify God like the friends, or like Job, accuse God, but based on limited evidence. And so the book is inviting us to honestly bring our pain and our grief to God, and to trust that God actually cares and that he knows what he's doing. And that's what the book of Job is all about.
Is that not amazing? I just watched that and I thought, wow. In 10 minutes, you got theological concepts so deep, so heavy, and we didn't actually read a verse of the book of Job. We did it in this globe. I'm not saying you should do that all your Bible reading. But that is a wonderful way. And now, read the book of Job. Anyway, there's so much there. I just thought that was really, really, really good. Okay,
that's a great rundown, but he completely makes God a lot nicer than he was.
Yeah.
Job there. God did not ask for trust.
That's a great point.
He showed Job things that put Job completely in his lane.
Yes, sir.
And he demanded a respect and an understanding of the fact that he was in no position whatsoever to make any sort of assumptions.
God was much more clear.
Yeah, I mean,
You're right.
He caused that man to fall on his face in fear and terror from in front of what he saw. And, And those animals were all about respect.
Yeah.
He said, you can't even begin to hope to approach this, and I created it. Who in the world can stand against me? If you don't have the hope of him, if you're not gonna bring him home to your daughter as a pet, if you're not gonna wrestle and, him and show some feat of strength, you can't even begin to approach me. And he sat down in front of him in an F5 tornado and said all of this stuff.
Yeah.
So I mean, this was very extremely wildly fear-driven, a fear-driven experience, and it was the Almighty God of the whole universe displaying His power and wonder in a demand for respect.
That is so true. And think about the other divine counsel images throughout the Bible. It's the same thing. I fell on my face like a dead man. You are right. We in modern Christianity so are convinced that God's love overrides everything else, and we forget that.
Like that's the part of breaking down the God being just. Like the first thing is saying, like you've lost that fear of God. When I take the time to think about it, I'm like, holy crap, And I think that losing that focus has kind of been, and I could be completely wrong, but it's kind of been something that's broken down. That first, there is a just and righteous God.
You're not wrong. Absolutely. Again, and I do blame the church for that. A lot of times we've adopted, in general, when I'm talking about in general, we've adopted sort of this 21st century God is love and nothing else matters mentality. We forget God is not simply, like I so often say, God came as a suffering service and love to die on the cross. When He returns, that is not how He is returning. He's returning much more like the God of Job.
C.S. Lewis, when he depicted Jesus in Aslan's character, said that he was not a tame lion.
Yes.
He's not going to be what you expect him to be.
Right.
We expect God to be our friend, our buddy, our pal, our amigo, and He's watching over us, and that's why Job's so confused. He's like, man, we had a really great thing going there.
Yeah.
What happened? How did this train go so far off the tracks? And God is trying to explain to him here and showing him, I don't have a stake in your justice, okay? That you think we're buddies and pals and amigos, and like you have the right to have an expectation of me, but God has no stake in justice for any of us. What Jesus suffered more than anyone, was brutalized to the point of not even being remotely recognizable as a member of humanity. And if you think you deserve more justice than Him, you are sadly mistaken. The servant is not greater than the master, and God owes us nothing.
Wow. See, that is so, and that's where we're about to head. That's what makes the other side amazing. What did He do at the very end of the book of Job? He restored everything because Job deserved it. No. Because this is going to sound funny when I say it this way. So how does God, I had the word that I've been using when I was writing the notes, I probably wrote it in here somewhere. How does God, what's the word I'm looking for? Not modify his judgment. How does God, I forget the term I was looking for. How does He soften? And that's not the word I'm looking for. How does God then soften His judgment? Temper. I think that's the word. How does God then temper His God? Because you do not want God operating in judgment at all times. And again, that's the point of the book, is the friends thought that God is just, and then He operates the world under justice all the time. He doesn't. That's the interesting thing. He doesn't. What do we call it? They're two little words. We call it mercy and grace. When you then add mercy and grace into God's judgment, you begin seeing a bigger picture of who God is. And that's what the little story at the very end is about, why He restored it. Had nothing to do with that. That said that now, after you understand my judgment, and you humbly, that's the key, is the humble. We'll tell you why we're going to talk about that in a minute too. I can also give you mercy and grace. And that's the other side. Okay, so let's hit it a little bit. So what is the lesson from the book of Job? I already said that. So is God fair and unjust? I already said that too. Let's move over here real quick. We did the video, we got that. The foundation of biblical justice, I like this. The foundation of biblical justice is God's perspective, not man's. Justice is a matter of perspective, and we don't have it. That's kind of the point. Justice is a matter of perspective, and we do not have it. Only God has a big enough perspective to truly be just. So, because we're going to run out of time, so we are out of time. So we're going to come back to 2 Samuel. I'll tell you, just give you a quick view of what's going on here. We're going to look at Nathan's rebuke of David. If you remember Nathan's rebuke of David, you get a view of God's justice. What did God do to David? I gotta say this. Let's tie to this. Y'all know Nathan, what happened there. And David had this concept of justice. What was his response to Nathan's thing? His response was, kill that man. That man deserves to die. And what did Nathan say? That man is you. If God operated under justice, you know what would happen. But then what does God say about David? Not in this passage. He's a man after my own heart. He loved David. Why? Because David was a man who had a humble heart. He goes right back to the book of Job. What he's describing here, that's David. David was sinful. David was all this stuff, but he always repented, which allowed God, through repentance, to then exercise his mercy and his judgment. Apart from that repentance and that humility, you're getting God's judgment. So anyway, we'll get into that next week. You think?
No, I was just going to say, what made David different, why God loved him so much, was because when he heard those words, his heart crumbled.
That's it. That's it.
And the individual that's not like that, they hear those words and it just hardens their heart like Pharaoh even.
The fist goes up to God.
That's right.
Yeah. You were going to read that verse?
Here's really our theme verse, and really it's because we hear this verse co-opted in the church, Micah 6:8. He has told you, this is what does God require of you. He has told you, oh man, what is God and what the Lord really wants from you. He wants you to do justice.
Do justice, as defined by him. Do justice.
Love mercy.
Love mercy.
And to walk humbly before your God.
Walk. There it is. You have to love justice. Do what is right. Fight for righteousness, as defined by God. Love justice. But then you have to
love mercy.
Love mercy. That's what's weird. And as I get a little older, I start understanding. Do you know, every so often you'll hear that testimony of a person who humbly came to the Lord and God showed them mercy. What is mercy? Mercy is giving you, not giving you what you deserve. That's the criminal who deserves massive punishment, and mercy is not giving them that. As opposed to grace, it's the opposite side of the same coin. Grace is giving you what you don't deserve. You don't deserve God's love and his grace and his mercy, but he can give it to you anyway. And guess who gets to make that decision? God does. It's not about operating the world justly. It is a decision made by God. It's interesting. Yes, sir?
And so if you correct all the injustice in the world, like social injustice, you can't give mercy at the same time, right?
The way we're going to tie this to the social justice movement, that's the point. Is they're creating their own definition of justice, what they say is just, eliminating God and then demanding the world fit our view of justice, which is not a biblical justice. And it does not include mercy or grace. It doesn't have the opposite side of justice.
One also purpose innocent bythink, like that woman who got her arm ripped off. I mean, like, there's a price to pay for that kind of thing too.
Absolutely.
Right.
You were about to say something?
I heard it summarized that any attempt at reconciliation or justice void of the cross inevitably descends into revenge.
Absolutely.
And there's our endpoint.
Our endpoint right there. Man's attempt at justice always devolves into human self-destruction and death. It always does. Always, because it's a wrong definition of justice, executed the wrong way with no love, mercy, or grace, which is how God tempers his own justice. Interesting, isn't it? To use that term, it's really not a great term, but that's it. Okay, we gotta go. We got plenty of time this week.
No, we didn't.
So we're gonna pick up there and keep moving next week.
No, we didn't.
I did it the way at 51 minutes. Okay, we gotta go.
Okay.
I'll pray. Dear Lord, thank you so much. Gosh, there's so many cool things in your word. There's so much to learn about your character, your nature, and there's so many assumptions. I just pray that when we come to the scriptures, when we come to learning you, that we can fight hard to set our assumptions aside and just learn who you are, figure out what you demand, what you require of us, and how we can best please you. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.